deacons. What did you mean by that, Pastor? What did you mean by that?
She was worried about signing in on two computers.
About
And she said, what's your password? I said, I don't have a password. She said, well, how do you get on it? I said, get on. She said, you don't need it? I said, gotta have whatever ID. Meeting ID. That's all you need. These three songs he played, Grandfather Clemens. And the other ones Grandpa listed she doesn't know. And I knew when I wrote them down and sent them to her, she didn't know. I'm curious as to why he played so many Irish tunes. Let's see, wherever he learned them. was in one of his letters. The high sign when it's time to change the slide?
So what now?
When it's time for her to change the slide?
I can't hear the fiddle music anymore. I think somebody got muted.
Yeah.
So I'm asking Leona and Peter to unmute.
Yeah.
I think that's where it happened.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a woman behind the
There
fiddle.
it is. Sorry, there she is. That was my fault. Sorry about that.
All right. What was I playing?
Like what I did last time, I had comments off to the side. They've got that.
They don't have the sides, do they?
They got everything.
I thought she was going to do the slides.
Jennifer's doing it.
Jennifer.
Well, my contacts don't work too good sometimes. Want to highlight them?
Mhm.
You want to highlight them?
No, that's okay. We marked them up.
You gonna read this section?
Yeah.
Okay. I changed the wording a little bit because it was out of the book or something, I think. You were talking to somebody in the family because that's, you said like Phyllis would know or something.
Yeah, I don't think it was me, but it was written somewhere. But it's okay. Maybe it was me. I don't know.
Because it says, remember that this story was written in 1947 about an incident in 1983. It said there was a large family with 13 children, I think. And then I doubt that Charlie ever worked in the woods again, as I do not remember him. And you said, I think Phyllis, or somebody said, I think Phyllis would know.
Right. I sent a thing to, well, Phyllis's brother, Ted, in Texas, hoping he'd tune in, because Grandpa had sent him, there was a note that they had sent all this bunch of letters to Ted. Right.
Thank you, Jackie. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. We are live on YouTube. I can find link to that. Okay. Leona and Peter, are you ready?
Yes, we are. Did you set
Okay.
your recording?
I sure did. Thank you for reminding me. I am going to share my screen quickly here and read you an introduction. Let's see, which one do I want to share?
You're going to do the,
No. Well, we had a talk before when you were on your way over here, because she asked and you didn't answer. So I said I'd do it and I got it ready.
how you going to know when to switch them?
Does that show up all right?
And Gardner said he loved the fiddlers.
Go,
Okay. Thank you for joining us for this evening's webinar.
comments would
The
help
Tug Hill
you.
Commission is excited to bring you this fun and historical 3-part webinar series about logging on Tug Hill. This unique piece of history comes to us from a Tug Hill family and their cherished documents, letters, photographs, and artifacts passed down through generations and recounted and interpreted for us by our very own Leona Sharasnosky and her son, Peter Sharasnosky. First, a little housekeeping. You're all muted and your videos are turned off, but please do put your comments and questions in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and it's also on YouTube Live right now. So let me tell you a little bit about our speakers before I hand it over to them. Leona Clemens was born and raised on a small farm in Osceola, New York, where she attended the one-room schoolhouse in the hamlet. She and her husband, Ray, raised 3 children in the town of Lorraine, where she worked as a library clerk. After that, she attended Empire State College and Syracuse University, where she earned her master's degree in library science. She worked as a library clerk and school librarian in the South Jeff schools for 27 years before retiring in 2006. She now works part-time as the director of the Osceola Public Library, and her family owns and operates a B&B on the family farm. She is an active volunteer for a few nonprofit groups, and in full disclosure, is a 36-year veteran commissioner on the Tug Hill Commission. Peter Shereznoski grew up in the towns of Lorraine and Osceola, and a good share of his days have been spent driving back and forth between the two. After high school came college, followed by 4 years in the Navy, stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. Peter came back to Tug Hill and worked with his father, Ray, in his logging business for some time before landing a position at the regional landfill. And 28 years later, he continues to work for the Development Authority of the North Country as the safety and environmental coordinator. Peter's interests and hobbies revolve around nature and the outdoors. He and his wife, Mary, enjoy walks in the Gulfs near their home in Rodman, kayaking, and learning about the world around them. So to start us off, I wanted to take a minute to address the feedback we received from the first logger session. You told us, and a lot of you told us that you wanted to hear the deacon's voice. So we searched the web and found a 1-minute clip of his promo. So we hope you'll sit back and enjoy a listen to his promos. Let's see if we can get this going. Okay, here we go.
Hey, you seeking the deacon? Just leave the dial set right where it is there. We'll be talking to you at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you may be surprised. This the deacon speaking, and let's not move that dial where he got it right there now. Leave it there when you go to sleep. Be along between 5 and 7 in the morning to wake you up. The news, the weather, the windjammer, all of that sort of thing from the wired woodshed. If you just leave the dial set where it is there and turn your alarm clock on for 5 o'clock or such a matter, and we'll be talking to you first thing in the morning, and noontime Sunday morning, too. Mr. Deacon speaking. Got a live telephone down here in the morning in the wired woodshed. Have a lot of fun, too. Don't miss the first hour and a half, or the whole 2 hours. See you then. All over news in the morning at 5 o'clock. A little barnyard banter, too, with the folks out around the countryside. They're up. You should be up. Leave your radio dial set where it is. Mr. Deacon speaking. We'll see you in the morning at 5 o'clock. Anytime between then and 7. Most fun at 5. See you then.
So we hope you've enjoyed that.
The second box of moon rocks from the Apollo
So,
flight say
oh
some
dear.
of the glassy coated
Let's
stones
see if
are
we can
larger
stop
and
that.
distinctly.
There we go. Okay, so without further ado, here are Leona and Peter.
That actually sounds just exactly the way the deacon always sounded. That's just the way he talked. In this session, we're going to bring you the letters that tell us of the trials and tribulations that folks on Tug Hill endured, with some snippets of old Lard's humors interspersed. My grandfather, John Irwin Clemens, known locally as Old Lard, corresponded with the Deacon Doubleday, who was a Syracuse radio personality in the 40s and 50s. The deacon wanted jargon and stories from the logging jobs on Tug Hill. This is one of Grandpa's true stories.
The title of this letter was The Grant Family Christmas of 1903. Here's just another tale of lumberjack life on Tug Hill. I have told in one of my other letters how we went to 22 from this side, of the woods. On this side, we call it 22, and on the other side, they call it Page. In the fall of the year 1903, a lot of men worked over there for the Gould Paper Company of Lyons Falls. Mr. Starks was a superintendent, a fine old fellow. The mill was running full blast. A lot of men and teams were everywhere you looked. Charlie Grant of Redfield, with 2 good teams of horses and another man by the name of Jack Norton, went over to work the fall and winter. Snow came in the middle of December, and as Christmas was in sight, Charlie thought he better write his wife that he would not be home for Christmas. Think of a wife and 4 little children to get a letter with this disappointment. But as Christmas came nearer, we all changed our minds, and a lot of boys were going home. Charlie changed his mind and settled up with Mr. Starks to bring us some money home. But the super had used his last check. To fix things, he would go to Lowville and draw the check and would send it to Redfield. He slipped a little note in with the check saying that Daddy would be home for Christmas. The children were so happy, and Ella looking forward to Christmas when they would be all together. December 24th, 1903 at 3 a.m., Charlie and Tom Marley started for home, going to see the wife and kiddies. 5 miles from 22 to Old Page, 9 miles from there to the schoolhouse on the other side of the woods. That would be North Osceola. 6 miles from there to home, but neighbors were taking the last 6 miles. From Old Page, they turned into the woods. It started to snow. The snow stuck to the trees. The trees being covered, all landmarks and blazes, did them no good. But they found men's tracks and followed them. When they came to a line, that is an axe blaze on the side of a tree, they'd follow that to the end. Night came. They tried to make a fire with no luck. They saved one match. They found a spruce tree that the snow had slid off and fastened the limb to the ground. They broke off twigs and made a bed. They lay down and covered themselves with an overcoat that one of the men had carried on his arm all day. Lying down in the snow with all the thoughts of Christmas gone, as the night went by, they were unable to keep warm. One would lay down. The other would run around the tree so many times. They made an agreement that when one called the other, he would get right up. Christmas came and went, the 2 men wandering around in the woods, wet through. They couldn't put on their mittens as their hands had frozen and swelled. They found a creek. Charlie went down to get a drink and got wet to his knees. Christmas night was full of misery and suffering. All day, Ella and the 4 children watched for him and worried. The dog sat out in the road facing the woods and howled all day during Christmas. On the 26th of December, the sun shone, and the men went out to meet the sun and came out to the school that they had started for at 3 a.m. on the 24th. They were 1 mile from the home of Ella, my father's home. Charlie did not remember the place and turned back towards the woods. Finally, it came to him, and he remembered. Seeing smoke coming from a house, they turned towards the smoke and found friends at the home of Sparrow Downs, Charlie's brother-in-law. Albert Downs went over to father's. My brother Clarence came with a team and took Charlie over home. A team went to Redfield for his family and the doctor. They found Charlie froze to his knees and both hands frozen. They were tough men, but with only an apple for Christmas. Tom is now dead. Charlie is still alive and is 77 years old and still a resident of Redfield. He has no toes on either foot, and his hands are some crippled. And I still claim that he is a tough man. Hear you in the morning, oh Lord.
Remember now that this story was written in 1947 about an incident from 1903. Ella Grant, Mrs. Charles, was sister to my grandfather, old Lard. Theirs was a large family with 13 children. I doubt that Charlie ever worked in the woods again, but I do not remember him. I hope that you'll enjoy the story with your family. It's hard to believe how they must have suffered.
Growing up on the hill, I can say as a kid, I was scared of the woods, especially after dark. There were a lot of noises in the woods, and not knowing what made them, is probably what produced the fear. As a man, I have learned what makes most of the sounds that one hears in the darkness. In tonight's session, there's a couple of stories of animals that roam Tug Hill that are encountered far less now than when the settlers were here.
Road job and Indian hunting grounds, January 1st, 1948. Dear Slackjaw, the man who was talking to you about Osceola on the 26th has not been here in a good many years. The road that he followed over to Swanket's Mills, or trail, has been made a blacktop. I was highway superintendent for 8 years, the longest any one man ever held it in this town. At Osceola, you turn right. It's the shortest route to Boonville in the north. I started building that road in 1926, 1 mile a year, and I got to the Osceola town line in 1930. It's known as the county system. Then I built 3 6/10 of a mile the following year for the county. Completing this road has helped the woods industry. The pulpwood from a good many acres and the hardwood is moving as fast as possible. This road carried all the timber from camps 1, 2, and 3. It has stood up well for a road that has had as little maintenance as this road has. After I crossed the Salmon River, there was a beech tree, and on this was cut in the bark the following: Indian hunting grounds, 10 miles square. This seems so funny. This tree was about 2 feet on the stump and was cut in the bark so long ago that the letters had broadened out to about 1 inch. I mean, when this was cut in the bark, it was about 1/8 of an inch, and as the tree grows, the letters broaden. The Oneida Indians have fishing rights on Fish Creek, and I'll tell you about old Paulus fighting the bear next week. Hear you in the morning, old lard. From what I learned in the years gone by, Grandpa tried to save the tree, but the county officials said that it would have to be removed. Either on his own or with some help, he was able to save a portion of the tree seen here and donate it to the Lewis County Historical Society, now in Lowville, where it still can be found today. I have been there and was so happy to know it is still there. It's in rough shape, but it's there. Grandpa's road toward West Leyden held up well. When the county tore up the road and redid it, the culverts were designed to be replaced. Some of the old concrete culverts were so well made that they were pushed off into the woods rather than try to break them up. Today's concrete might last 20 years before it starts breaking up.
So now the Oneida Indian Chief Paulus story, circa 1948. In your program of the 22nd, you talked to an Indian that was very interesting. He spoke of a friend by the name of Paulus, the chief of the Mohawks that lived on Fish Creek. They were given a reservation down near Oneida, and they all went but the chief. It was in the fall of the year, and he had a trap line from Fish Creek
To the west.
From Fish Creek to the west, and there was 4 big springs that fed the creek. One day the chief did not come back. The neighbors went looking for him. They found him in the woods. A bear that would weigh about 400 pounds on one side of a fallen tree, and the chief on the other. Both were dead. The chief with only a jackknife. The spring goes by the name of Paulus Pond. The neighbors got word to the reservation, and they walked back up here to bury him, and they got there about 10 a.m. They asked where he was, and they started up to the stream to bring him out. They would not let the neighbors go with them. They came back about 4 o'clock empty-handed. The neighbors went up into the woods to find where he was buried. The only thing they found was a heap of stone piled round and 4 foot high. They dug under in the ground and 4 feet and found nothing. This story was told to me by Mr. and Mrs. Lewis, who were in their 90s. The story was told to me in 1932. Perhaps the reason I enjoyed your program so much is that my great-grandmother was a full-blooded Indian by the name of Blazier. Hear you in the morning, Old Lard Clemens. As a kid, I spent a lot of time wandering out in the woods of North Osceola with my cousins, the Witsigmans. I remember hearing them talk about looking for arrowheads. Their father, Larry, was raised in the vicinity of Fish Creek and maybe heard these stories or at least were told of the time when the Native Americans roamed the lands they grew up on. I guess on some level I understood, they were here before we were, but reading these letters really brought it home that they used Tug Hill as their hunting and fishing grounds. This next letter tells us some of the dangers of working in the wood business. It is safe to say that we've engineered our world so that it is a much safer place to work. But think of the work they did cutting trees with crosscut saws, and I'm not sure I would last a week doing that kind of work.
Accidents in the woods. There was no date on this one. Will the next 50 years make as much of a change as I have seen in the woods in the last 50, he writes. As I look at the picture of April 3rd in the Watertown paper, it brings to my mind Eugene Macbeth. The first picture shows a log jam. I've seen logs piled 25 feet high and only one log holding the whole heap. Rivermen would pike away at that log. It would let go and the peavy man would ride away with the jam, taking his life in his hands doing it. Every year, there had been from 1 to 5 men killed on the river on the drive from about 1900 until the present date. The Macbeths were all rivermen, the best you could find. There was Jim, John, and William. Their father, John, was walking boss for the Gould Paper Company and could ride a log as good as the next one. He was a very small man, but he knew the logging business, and none of the jobbers put anything over on him. Everything has changed. They call the walking boss of today the woods superintendent. They are fine fellows, but I doubt if they ever worked in the woods with the Macbeths, the McCarthys, the Maloneys, Sullivans, and the Mackeys. I don't think there were as many accidents then as there are now. There were only a few that I recall that were so bad. There were 3 in the mill at Page that all go, let's see.
That all the old jacks
will tell you about. As you went from the old boiler room to go over to the engine room, there was the widest belt I've ever seen. And at that time, no electric lights. There was a loose platform, and that was supposed to be kept over the belt, but someone forgot, and there was no light. A man by the name of Cunningham stepped on the belt. It was over so quick. In those days, the boys got together and passed the hat, and there was a good purse that was made up. A man named by the name of Dunn was killed as he was oiling up one of the carriages. There were 2 sides on the mill, and it cut from 75 to 85,000 board feet of lumber in 10 hours. This family was left in bad shape, a mother and 4 children. The Lumberjacks, always hard drinkers, but with hearts of gold. They have always given to children and widowed mothers. At that time, the Sisters of St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Utica would come up to the woods from one camp to another and would take back a nice purse with them and would tell us if any of us were in need of hospitalization to come and we would be taken care of. I only knew one man that ever went there, and he said he had the best of care. We were told that race, creed, or color did not matter. All would be treated alike, and that we were all created equal. Old Lard. Old Lard, in many of his letters, tells of the big hearts Lumberjacks had. In this snippet, he also tells of their big thirst for the bottle. Lumberjacks were always hard drinkers. Uncle came back from Redfield with his little black horse. He unhitched him and the horse went feeding around the yard. Annie was very much opposed to drinking. And about 2 a.m., she put a sheet over herself, took a pitchfork, and made several trips around him and back up onto the porch, each time coming closer to him and stabbing the fork into the ground. He roused up and said, "Who are you?" She answered him in a deep voice, "I'm the devil." "You can't scare me," he answered. "I've been married to your sister for 35 years. This next letter is also about the lumberjack and his love of drink.
Springing Out, May 5th, 1948. Dear Bob, after the drive, the old lumberjack was uneasy and would wander around from place to place or try to get into places they would call it springing out. Fred went to Utica, a great hangout for the Jack. He was wandering in hopes that he might run into somebody who he knew who would stake him to another drink. He had all he could carry when he spied people going into a building. And he followed in. As he got inside, he found seats. He did not want to sit down. He was crowding and trying to get up front, thought that was where the bar was. When in the aisle and in his way, a man was kneeling. Fred gave him a kick and said, "Get on your feet. What do you think you're doing there?" The man got up and resented that kind of treatment, and an usher called a cop. He took Fred down to the Crowbar Hotel. Monday morning, they took Fred before Scotchy Connors, the judge. He was getting along in years, and in his early days, he had been a lumberjack. He asked Fred his name and where he came from. Fred said, "Tupper Lake." The judge says, "Can't you come down here from the woods without going into a Salvation Army meeting and causing trouble?" Fred said he would try. Scotchy put his hand in his pocket, gave him $2, told him to get back up in the woods and not to let him see him again for 6 months. I guess the only thing to say about this story is that maybe if you've never gotten a snoutful and done something foolish, maybe you haven't lived a full life.
Teamsters, Log Camps, and Bears, February 20th, some year. Dear Bob, Monday a.m., February 20th, you said it was cold. I began to believe it. It was 16 below at 7 a.m., and as the old Jack would say, that the thermometer was way down below Redfield. This morning brings a picture of 50 years ago to about 10 years ago. It was during the Roosevelt administration when things began to change, and we noticed it up here on Mount Misery. We began to forget logging with horses and began with tractors, loaders, and trucks. Before the 1st of September, the logging would begin. The old crosscut saw and the 2 men would average 7,000 feet of hardwood logs a day. 2 saws to the team and teamster, 2 men to pile up the logs on flat ground. The pile that would then be about 4 logs high. A swamper that would cut the tracks for the team to skid. I've seen this work done for $5 a thousand feet, and now it costs $6 a thousand to get them out. There was lumber camps from 16 to 50 men everywhere you wanted to work, and from 55 to 20 teams drawing logs from the skidway to the landing. A good many times the teamsters would sleep in the lobby, and the Troy boy would come into the lobby, build up the fire, and shake up the teamsters and tell them it was 4:30. He would hustle to the barn and feed their teams. Then with curry comb and brush, they would lay every hair. The old-time teamsters gave those horses a real hairdo in the AM and the PM, or their jobs were short. Breakfast at 5:30 a.m., and then a big run for the barn and try to be the first one out. A good many cold nights, they would find their sleighs froze down, where some of the others had carried water and poured it onto the runners. They had to get axes and chop them loose. If they found the guy that did it, he was called anything but a gentleman. Our first sleighs were 3-foot stiff sleighs connected together with a tag tongue. After a few years, we got loose jointed logging sleighs, and it was so much easier to make roads for them. It had to be a bad road to tip it over. As the team and sleigh took off for their load in the morning, on a morning like this, the sleighs would squeak and growl. You could no longer hear the men talk a half a mile away. The snow at this time of year was 4 to 6 feet deep. They tried to make turning out places along the hall, and I believe some of those old teamsters helped with that mule team song, for you could hear the loaded team coming up the hall, and in that deep, heavy voice that all the teamsters would shout. I asked one old teamster what made a teamster's voice so heavy. He said, "How could it be any other way? Look at all the dirt you eat from morning till night." And they must have liked it, for you couldn't get them to do anything else.
When it got to about the 1st of April, the old timber beasts would get lonesome to go into the woods. It was also the time of year that made for good snowshoeing, and this made gum picking easier. As you strolled through the woods, you was liable to run onto a bear track or maybe a marten or a fox or coon. If you could get some of those, it would help get a little money to keep the old wolf from the door. The big ideas were bears. Their habits were known to everybody, and we knew that they would den up about Christmas and then come out about April 1st. The female with cubs did not roam until she could get some bare ground to get her family on, and of course that was near the clearings. The male came out of the den a little weak at first, but after a day or two you could follow him on and never see him unless you should happen to run into him by luck. I would like to tell you the story of John Bush Sr. and his son, John Bush, who lives at Pulaski. The rarest bear story that I ever heard. It was the last of March in the 1890s, the year I don't remember. John Bush Sr. took his gun and axe. That was the tools of torture that we carried at the time of year. He took off into the woods with no idea just where he would go. His main object was to feed the family. He covered 10 miles of wandering through the woods one way and another, nearly tired out, and about 3 miles from home, looking off through the forest, he saw a bear. He watched his movements a little and say that he was unusually weak, went near the bear, and found the bear was unable to get out of his way. He cut a crotch stick and drove that bear towards home. And at the top of a hill where the fire tower now stands, lived a man by the name of Nelson Clifford, an old bear hunter. He saw Bush coming, opened the woodshed door, and helped him drive the bear in, and helped him put a collar and a chain on him. They hunted together for the rest of the spring, when he was able to get both feet on good old terra firma again. They had 2 big bears and 10 cubs. They sold 10 cubs to the Rochester for their park, and the old bears were shipped to New York. If you think I've left anything out, ask John Bush of Pulaski. His stories will make 2 of mine, believe it or not. Hear you in the morning, oh Lord. So the mechanization of the logging on Tug Hill began in the 1930s, when the Roosevelts were in the White House. Also, when it was legal to catch wild animals and sell them to zoos. Life was much harder in those days, and we should not judge. My great-grandfather sounds like he was a very opinionated fellow. Maybe that's where I get it from. But he did say this: I wish to say that if I have ever said anything that I am sorry for, I am willing to be forgiven. For the record, I'll say the same. This next tale meanders a bit like the Salmon River. It starts in the early 1950 up on Mount Misery, Old Lard's name for Osceola, with a mild winter, and ends up 9 miles east of Lowville with a panther.
Unusual winter car sales, kids strike, and panthers. March 5th, 1950. Dear Bob, well, another year has rolled around, and the rarest of all the winters I have ever seen. There was only once in my life that I have ever seen bare ground at Christmas time, and then to see bare ground in spring-like weather till the middle of February. And I began to think, what are we going to do to make maple syrup this spring? We can feel thankful we didn't have the babes in the woods wandering through telling us to pour water on the roots and it would run out of the tree 4 feet from there and make sap. Well, they've never done our forest any good, only to set out trees. I think if I carry on that conservation job at Albany, I'll put the babes in the woods making almanacs all but 3 months of the year. If my father was alive, he would be 128 years old. And every year on the 1st of March, he would say, you will see as much snow on the 20th as you saw on the 1st. Mrs. Nora Dean would be telling us that there was never a winter on Mount Misery that the fences were not covered. I have never seen it fail. And now the beautiful is piled up so high that you cannot see a car go past the house. I've been denned up for 1 week and so full of throwing bull that I had to take off yesterday. I found a nice gathering at Hotel Buckley of several lumberjacks. As Buller's log job is signed off until spring, we got out a good many loads of logs. Out of the several makes of chainsaws, I found that they were unable to drag them through the snow, and they finished up with the old crosscuts. Among the group was a car agent from Pulaski with a 1949 model trying to sell cars. The paint was nice, but in order to sell a car in Osceola, you have to demonstrate on Salmon River Hill to the prospective buyer. When we began to kid him, he flashed a 10 spot that would make, that he could make the hill. It was covered before he could change his mind. He could only get about halfway up the hill and came back down half-hearted and hired Speed Woodard with his Model 8 1932 to tow him up the hill. I'd like to warn the dealers not to try to sell one of those late models in Osceola when the snow is on. I feel sorry for the farmers that had to be dragged in on this centralization idea. Of course, we know that it's got to be guided by some big shot in the village. The farmer's only privilege is to pay his taxes, but the children in Osceola are learning fast. While the coal strike was on, the school children thought they had a right to strike also. They had been drawn from 12 to 16 miles in an unheated bus all winter, with the thermometer up here from 0 to 20 below. 2 days, the bus stopped for them. There was no heat. They had inspected the bus, and they stayed home. The principal, I guess, must have been raised in Florida, was pretty mad, but they put heat in the bus, and the strike ended. I've been listening to that Panther gab around Syracuse. July 29th, 1839, the house of James Rainey, 9 miles east of Lowville, was left in charge of a 12-year-old girl. A little child, a little over a year old, was sleeping in the bed in an adjoining room. Hearing the child scream, the girl sprang from the door and saw an animal leap from the open window with the infant in its mouth. She followed about 40 rods, thinking it was a large dog, until it reached the gateway. After several times trying to leap over with its burden, it made off into the woods without it. The child was not seriously injured, and the animal was proved to be a huge male panther. I'll hear you in the morning, old lard.
That puma was likely a species of New York State known as the Eastern Cougar. The animals were killed off and have been absent from the state since the late 1800s. This next story is entitled Woodpeckers and Pigs. It's one of my more favorite stories of the bunch. As I sit on the log loader up here on Prince Brook and look around, visiting nature, a red-headed woodpecker flew down and lit on the boom and drummed on the iron several cracks and looked down at me as if to say, are you one of those babes in the woods that's gone around through the woods and cut or girdled the trees that were home and the home of the grouse? This was the first woodpecker I'd seen in 5 years. It was interesting to go along toward evening and see the partridge up in the beech trees picking nuts and budding on the white birch. Or later, the deer will come along and feed on the nuts on the ground and grow fat, waiting for the hunters. In my boyhood days, I had a drove of 16 pigs that were fattened on beech nuts. My job after snow came on was to take a horse and a 10-gallon kettle and make a path up into the woods, and every pig would follow. I had to take them in before school and bring them in at night until after the middle of January, when the snow would be from 18 to 3 foot deep and the pigs were ready for market. The fat of these pigs was as yellow as butter. I asked one of the babes in the woods what the idea of girdling the trees that had good saw logs in them. His reply was that the top was too big. The old Highland woodcock, or the cock of the woods, got his living from worms and bugs. All the men in the woods admired the bird that is gone, but the babes in the woods are here in the spring of the year. As the snow mosses over and the leeks start to grow, they were all gathered by the families of the hill, and having them for a week or two, you were pleased to see the cowslips and dandelions, and then the different berries. And this was the way of the tough, rugged men that made the woods their home. This is all a thing of the past, where the cowslip garden is all treaded into the earth, where the babes have swarmed and dropped their cigarette butts and treaded around with their hands behind their backs, reaching for the taxpayers' money. It seems too bad that when it comes time that this class of men have been taken back in the woods, where their shame will not be seen. They could not be sent to Syracuse and have them take up those streetcar tracks and take the big shots and the so-called foremen over to Auburn and give them an electric bath. Well, Grant Wright has just backed his truck under the loader. Now in his 30s, he had polio in his childhood. Both legs are crippled, but loves the woods and makes his living supporting his widowed mother by manual labor. You could not hire him to rob our wildlife's food and the beauty of nature. Hear you in the morning, oh Lord. So this letter mentions a saying I remember from childhood. I don't remember if it was mom or dad or grandpa or who it was, but it was somebody in the family. The saying was, the snow never leaves Tug Hill. The moss just grows over it in the summertime. One last little laugh from old Lard. Auntie to her father. Father, he has thrown away the bottle. Her father replied, I bet not so far, but what he can't reach it. Some of the pictures of the logging camps and other Tug Hill logging pictures were provided by George Stevens. Thank you, George, very much. We hope you've enjoyed session 2 as much as we have. We want to thank the Tug Hill Commission for helping us share these letters with you that have been a part of our family's life for so long. We look forward to sharing more letters with you in the next session in March. We will read letters about agriculture and life on the homestead. So join us and learn what was grown and what they did with it on early Tug Hill.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just happy to say that I'm glad I was muted and my video was off, because I'm pretty sure I snorted a few times. I laughed so hard. That was very entertaining. Thank you. Who's got some questions for us? Bennett Gardner said the old timers used to call the Panthers painters.
The Panthers?
Painters?
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a couple of hands raised. Let me see if I can allow Amy to talk. Oh, Amy, can you talk now? You can unmute yourself.
That was terrific. Thank you very much. I love just like, just like, well, there's this bear and we just kind of drove into a shed, it's like, oh, okay. Why not?
Who'd have thought, right?
Yeah. Terrific. Thanks.
Good question.
Yeah.
That's a great question from Kitty. Would you be able to name the 13 children in Old Large childhood home?
I can next session because it's on my computer, but the computer's being used right now.
All right. Thanks, Jackie.
Stay tuned.
We have their names, and I could go through some of them. I certainly wouldn't have them in order, but they were quite a crew. The length of time she must have been having children, because I don't think there were any twins. I think they lost one son maybe when he was about 14. I think his name was George. And then they lost Armenia. She died in an accident. And there was Ella and Etta, and a lot of them, their middle names were what they called them. They didn't call them by their first names for some reason, probably because they were named after somebody else.
I know, I looked that up. Their first names were only used for special occasions. Your middle name, that was your proper name. Your middle name was what everybody called you.
Oh,
That was a German thing.
was it?
From what I read.
Okay. Well, I'm sure when Grandma Lavina got mad at somebody, she'd use their first name. I can't come up with all the names.
Well, Jackie will get those for us next time. We have somebody else who's got their hand raised. Patricia, I'm gonna allow you to talk if you want to unmute. Patricia, do you want to unmute? Oh, maybe not. Okay.
I had a question via text. They want to know what the babes in the woods
Me too.
were.
So they were the foresters from the state, and when you walk around the woods your whole life and you feel you know it, and then along come these young guys telling you it's better to girdle trees than to have them growing too thick, or too many, and they call it basal area now, right? And so probably Jennifer could speak to this. She's one of those educated, but I don't think she's a babe in the woods.
Never got practiced, so no.
But yeah, they were the foresters from the DEC, prior to the DEC, but from the state that came in to help manage the forests.
Patricia, you're unmuted now. Did you want to ask your question? Okay.
Any more questions?
We had some more stories to tell.
That's right.
So let's talk about the fiddling beforehand, actually. So George Washington Clemens was Old Lard's father. And unbeknownst to me, I learned how to fiddle from my grandmother, Alice Calvin Clemens. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that George Washington Clemens played the fiddle until we started researching things. And so Mom found some of the tunes that that George Washington played. And so Old Lard had mentioned tunes like Girl I Left Behind Me, Haste to the Wedding, Old Zip Coon, and a couple of others that I don't know how to play, although I'm kind of familiar with them. So I think I might learn them for next time. But so George Washington Clemens played until he got religion. And then the fiddle got put away. And so that's I didn't realize it came down from that side of the family too. So that's kind of cool.
Thanks, Jackie.
Jackie's played the fiddle and had religion her whole life, so I don't know what the problem is.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Carol wants to know what was called Mount Misery.
That was, well, my mother and I maybe disagree on it a little bit. Go ahead and tell them what.
Just up the road from where Grandpa grew up, just right there nearby, is probably one of the steepest hills you'd ever find. And I thought that's what he called Mount Misery. Peter thinks that Mount Misery was just Osceola in general, because there's a lot of hills there. So he may be right, but we'll never know.
And it may even have been Tug Hill, but I think it was Osceola. I think Mount Misery was his name for Osceola. I looked it up online. There's Mount Miseries all over the place. Pennsylvania's got some, New York's got actual places that are named that, but I think he kind of liked that name for Osceola.
And when we were kids, when we posted the property, my father would put the Mount Misery Hunting Club.
Yeah, we always put Mount Misery Hunting Club on our posted signs. I've forgotten that.
We have a hand raised here. Carl Golis. Carl, I'm gonna allow you to talk. If you want to unmute yourself, you can unmute and ask your question.
Well, I can remember back in the early 60s in the Branningham area, some of the, I call them descendants or friends of the Wired Woodshed crew, would stop into a certain tavern before they went into the woods to hunt. And some of those voices and stories bring back some pretty good memories, because they were quite a lively crew.
I can imagine. Great story. Thanks, Carl.
Yes, sir.
Should mention, I think Jackie mentioned this to us previously, that the Deacon's radio studio is all set up at the State Fair in the agricultural museum, agricultural exhibit at the State Fair. So you can go check that out, and it's there. And yep.
When he talks about the Windjammer, that's a piano, and the Windjammer is on site at the exhibit.
Excellent.
It didn't show it in the picture, but he had cowbells all on the wall, all around that studio. People would send him cowbells, and he rang it. He rang a cowbell every morning, and he always slammed the gate, and you could put people on the gate. And one letter, Grandpa asked him to put his neighbors, the Blairs. Would you put Donnie, Mary, and Bob Blair on the gate, please? And then you'd hear the old great gate go creak, crack, and slam shut, and could be on the gate.
So Kitty Garlock says, I could not be sure if he was in favor of maple syrup or not.
He was. Oh, he loved it. And he had a lot of jackwax parties in the spring. He always had a finishing off party. And we've got a picture of that too.
We carry on that tradition every year.
Yep. We do it.
Can you explain what that is?
What's that?
Can you explain what jackwax is?
Oh, jackwax is you heat maple syrup up to a softball stage, and you get pans of snow, preferably clean snow, and
Yellow snow.
pour the syrup on the snow, and it sets up. If it's ready, if it's the right temperature, it'll set right up, and you can wind it up on a fork and suck on it, and it's delicious.
Maple syrup taffy, kind of.
So Pete, I think I've just Uncle has settled the argument between you and Mom.
Oh, okay.
Grandpa told him he grew in sight of Mount Misery.
Okay.
So
I was wrong.
So my brother put that in from Michigan.
I think he's just sticking up for you.
Probably.
So we're about time for Jack Wax. I think the syrup's going to start flowing here shortly with these temperatures we're going to get.
Probably won't be in Osceola yet.
Yeah, I was thinking today the sap might have run. It was 35 here, almost 40.
Well, I'm going to say thank you. And I cannot wait for the next one to wait a whole month, but oh, we got one more hand up.
We've got some good ones lined up.
Ben Coe has his hand up.
Yep. Ben, I allowed you to talk. If you want to unmute, you can ask a question.
I just wanted to say hi, and because seeing Leona and Katie, it's great fun and great stories. I'm so glad you did this. See you next time.
Glad you're on, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Great. Well, we'll see everyone then in a month.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.